In this week's Parsha of Parshat Yitro, perhaps the most famous part of the Parsha is clearly the Ma'amad Har Sinai, the receiving of the Torah, the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'd like to focus in on one of them today, one that we encounter quite often, and perhaps get a little bit of a handle on some of the aspects that are included in this lav, as well as perhaps get an understanding of how we can work on ourselves to be more careful not to fall into this particular transgression. The last of the Aseret HaDibrot says, Lo tachmod, source 1, you shall not covet your fellow's house, you shall not covet your fellow's wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your fellow. Now, in Parshat V'eschana, when the Aseret HaDibrot is repeated, so there the Torah adds another phrase to describe the idea of chemda, and that is you shall not desire your fellow's house, lo tit'aveh. And we'll see that there are differences between taiva, desire, and lo tachmod, chemda, coveting. And we have to understand what the differences are and their applications and implications for our lives. But the major question that I think we need to ask is, after all, lo tachmod, lo tis'aveh, not to covet, is something that's found in a person's heart. You see something that belongs to somebody else, and it's a natural human tendency to want this. How can we work on ourselves in order to be able not to have that feeling and be able to go beyond that feeling and not desire and not work on ways of trying to acquire that which does not belong to us? That's going to be our overall question. Our secondary question is, Lo tachmod ends the Aseret HaDibrot, and we need to understand why is this the grand finale? What is the importance within this mitzvah, which seems to be this lav, don't covet. But there's something deeper here, that this is like the way the Aseret HaDvarim, the 10 utterances, end with, that this should be, so to speak, ringing in our heads. And the question is, what is that message that is trying to be conveyed by this being the last of the Aseret HaDibrot? It's interesting, Rav Rice in Mirosh Shirim points out that when you, in source 3, when you look at the modern world, we say to ourselves, Sheyesh lafsher la'adam dror merei bi'v limanak kechol lafshar malag below. The modern world is, let man have his options of being able to do that which he wants, and we do not restrict a person in their action, in their thought, in their speech. Whatever comes to you, you can say. There's freedom of speech, freedom of everything. It's total freedom. And how do we understand this aspect which seems to be restricting us tremendously? And here, Rav Rice points out that is perhaps the reason why before the Aseret HaDibrot are given, the Torah commands us, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe Rabbeinu, and re-emphasizes this many times about the inyan of Hagbala, Vigbalta et Tahar, to put a gate, a fence, surrounding the mountain, to tell the people they're not allowed, a gvul, a boundary, they're not allowed to cross over. And explains Rav Rice that aspect of being able to separate the people from the mountain was not only technical, so they shouldn't enter the mountain, but it's much more philosophical as well. It's teaching the people that you want to understand what Ma'amad Har Sinai is about, the giving of the Torah. It's about gvulot. It's about boundaries. That you can't do whatever you feel like. And there are quite a number of mitzvahs in the Torah that stem from the heart. Loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not hating your friend. Because the Torah is an all-encompassing aspect of our lives. And indeed, as Rav Rice points out in the double underline in 4, the entirety of a person, one's speech, one's thoughts, have to be under the rubric of Ol Machut Shamayim. Is this appropriate? Is this inappropriate? Am I becoming a more godly person? Is this something that Kadosh Baruch Hu wants from me or not? And that applies to all areas of one's life. Having stated this, I'd like to try to before even speaking about the specifics of Lo Tachmod, I'd like to introduce this idea that we are under the aspect of a Kabbalat Omachut Shamayim, under God's jurisdiction and sovereignty in all aspects of our lives. And I think a very positive spin, which will give us a background and an understanding of what does it mean that a person can be commanded on such a personal type of aspect of not coveting and not desiring what doesn't belong to them. And I'd like to explain, I think, a beautiful understanding of a very famous Gemara in Rav Belsky's writings in Einei Yisrael. And I'd like to go through this piece because I think it gives us just a general feeling of what receiving of the Torah is all about, our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch